put her on without too much further ado. And next time I'll try to bring my speech so I can be a little bit more formal with that. But again, thank you all for coming. And let's have a round of applause for Ron Quinn.
Thank you all for coming and coming to hear me talk, geez, again. And I'll be back. I'll be back in February. I'm going to come and talk about the microbiome, which is this kind of talk being 1984 revisited. I first read this book when I was 50 years younger. Is that right? No, I was 60 years younger. And I read it. I read it a couple of years after that because it really impressed the heck out of me. At the time it was written, it was considered science fiction, and nowadays we don't think of it that way, but it really was. And then a few years ago, I was talking to a buddy of mine about how the world was turning into the world of 1984, and he said, "That's a book, right?" Yeah. So about 3-4 months ago, I decided I'd read it again, just to bring my brain up to speed. Like, is the world really turning into the world of 1984? So let's take a look at that. 1984, dystopian, social, science fiction novel, and cautionary tale. And we all know what all those words mean, right? So none of this should be hard to explain. But the author, George Orwell, that wasn't his real name, but he modeled this after Stalinist Russia and Nazi Germany, which is what was going on at the time. And in fact, it's impacted our society so much, it's now part of our vocabulary. In fact, on the way over, I was listening to a podcast and they actually said Orwellian dystopian hellscape. Right? So everybody knows what Orwellian is about. Yes. The book was about examining the roles of truth, facts, and language within politics and the ways in which they can be manipulated. And of course, the people that do this manipulation are the people that are in power. George Orwell was a democratic socialist. He wrote the book, he finished writing the book in 1948. So the title is just 1948 with the last 2 digits reversed. This is not a prediction, right? So the fact that we're in this current year, we're almost in 2023, and it hasn't happened to us yet, that doesn't mean we're safe. Okay. Just because we got through that year. It centers on the consequences of totalitarianism, mass surveillance, and repressive representations of people and behaviors in society. The lead character in the story is a fellow named Winston Smith, and he lives in a conglomeration of countries that's referred to as Oceania. And Oceania has certain characteristics. It's in a state of perpetual war. There's omnipresent government surveillance. There's historical negationism and manipulation of reality on a constant and ongoing basis. There's manipulation of language, propaganda, and stratification of society. The government is composed of 4 ministries: the Ministry of Truth, the Ministry of Peace, the Ministry of Plenty, and the Ministry of Love. And we'll look at all of those. But we're going to start with the perpetual war idea. This is the way the world looks in the year of the book, in Winston Smith's 1984. And the pink stuff, that's Oceania, North America, South America, South Africa, Australia, and London, or England rather. And London is referred to in the book as Airstrip 1. So they've changed the name to make it sound like a military kind of a place. The 3 super states are Oceania, Eurasia, and you see that's Russia and northern China, and East Asia, which is the southern part of the Asian continent. And all these super states' ideologies are practically identical. They're the same, but they pretend they're not. Because if they were the same, how can you be at war with everybody if they're exactly the same issues? So they keep the public ignorant of the fact that they're all the same, so that they can maintain this constant state of war. And the whole world economy is based on the continuation of warfare. But the alliances are constantly being shifted. which is an interesting thing. There's a speech in the book during Hate Week where they're talking about the Eurasians and how we're at war with Eurasia. And in the middle of the speech, somebody comes up and hands the speaker a note, and he immediately switches from talking about Eurasia as the enemy to East Asia as the enemy. Doesn't skip a beat, just keeps on going because we changed history. The Ministry of Peace is responsible for all of this perpetual warfare. And this is not uncommon even in the world today. You know, before 1943, we had a War Department in the United States. But after World War II, or during World War II, the name was changed to
Department of Defense.
the Department of Defense, right? So we're not at war anymore, now we're defending ourselves, which means we're good guys, we're not bad guys, because we changed the name. So the Ministry of Peace supports and engages in oceanic perpetual war against either of the two superstates. And the primary aim of warfare is to just maintain a standard of living that works for the ruling party and maintains their power. And that's what the war is all about. Now, in America, I looked up, starting in 1900, you know, how long have we been at war? Are we in a state of perpetual war? The orange ones are the USA only. So there are some wars in there, like Crazy Snake's War, where we're fighting with the American Indians. The white ones are us fighting with our allies. And if you look at the dates, they pretty much overlap. There are very few gaps in there when the United States has not been at war with somebody. And this goes on and on. And the ones you just saw, that huge list, that does not include the undeclared wars. So Afghanistan is not there. So, you know, yeah, we kind of look like that omnipresent perpetual war. The next thing in the characteristics of this environment in 1984 is the government surveillance. Everybody in the outer party, now there's three levels of stratas of society. There's the inner party, they're the guys in charge. That's Bernie Sanders, 0.5%, it's those guys. Then there's the outer party, they're all the civil servants, and they're all part of the state. And then there's the proles, the proletariats. Those are people like plumbers and bakers, you know, working folks. Everybody in the outer party, this includes Winston Smith, is under constant surveillance. They have telescreens, and this is why it was science fiction when it was written. They had telescreens in everybody's apartment. And when you walked into your apartment, there was a camera that could see you, and there was a microphone that could hear you, and you couldn't turn it off. It was on all the time. And the microphone in the book was so sensitive that it could pick up your heartbeat if you were standing next to it. Pretty darn good. The kids didn't go to the Boy Scouts or the Cub Scouts or the Girl Scouts. They joined the spies. And the kids were trained in the spies to look for signs of subversion. And they were trained to look for it everywhere, including in their own parents. And there's a scene in the book where a kid is bragging about how they turned in their own mother for exhibiting signs of thinking about being subversive. And that's called a thought crime. She was thinking about subversion. And she turned them over to the thought police. And her parents went to a facility where they were going to be corrected. There's another thing that goes on, and this is a made-up organization that the thought police created called the Brotherhood. And it's a subversive organization that's organized to subvert the state. Doesn't actually exist. But if you believe it exists and you go looking for it, well, you're a thought criminal, right? And then they got you. At one point in the book, Winston says, thought crime does not entail death. Thought crime is death. Now, it may be literal death, right? But it might not be. It might be that you go and get retrained and have your brain fixed, and then you're re-released in society, but you're no longer the person you were when you went in. Now, Winston makes a big mistake in the book. He gets a diary. He's in a old neighborhood, and he sees an antique shop, and he goes inside, and there's a nice blank book in there. And the guy that owns the place is Mr. Charrington, he sells him the book. And Winston immediately knows he's a thought criminal, but one of the first things he writes in the book is, I'm already dead. Because he knows I'm writing down my thoughts, I'm a thought criminal, they're gonna catch me, I'm as good as dead. Later on in the book, he meets a girl, Julia, they fall in love. One of the first things he says to her is, we are the dead. She says, yeah, we are the dead, because they're doing something that's not prescribed. And it's the rule of the ant colony. If it's not mandatory, it's forbidden. The way Winston thinks he's getting away with writing in his diaries is a little cubicle in his apartment. And he believes that while he's in that cubicle, you know, they don't know he's writing in this book. So he's getting away with it. Little does Winston know that Mr. Charrington, who sold him that book, is a member of the thought police. So they had him from the minute he left the store. This happens today in certain places. These scenes are from Russia, where they made it against the law to protest the Ukrainian war. So people went out on the street, and if they had a sign that says, you know, stop the war in Ukraine, they would be arrested. It was against the law to say that. So people instead went out with blank placards, and they still got arrested because they were thinking subversive thoughts. The thought police got them. Surveillance in China is huge. China has spent billions of dollars to purchase technology and facial recognition and artificial intelligence. And analysts predicted several years ago that China would have as many as 300 million cameras installed by this year. Databases examined by the People's Daily, which is a Chinese newspaper, in 2019 found that surveillance tools can identify everybody on the street and whether they're members of the party or not. So if you're walking down the street, you're on camera. And if you go talk to somebody, they know you and they know who you're talking to, and they know if you're a party member, and they can make assumptions based on that. Right now, there's one public camera for every 4 Chinese citizens. So surveillance is pretty hefty. China's installed base is supposed to jump by next year to 567 million cameras, which would make it about 3 cameras, or 1 camera for every 3 Chinese citizens. They have a social credit system. So they're watching you on camera, and now you can get points given to you or taken away from you, depending on the behavior that they observe. An interesting story I saw recently is there was a man exercising in China. He was running through a park, and they followed up with infection records. He had COVID, and they found 4 or 5 other people that he ran past who also got COVID, and then they identified the runner as the person that was spreading the COVID. That's how good this surveillance is. So they can incentivize good behavior, and they can take away credit if you don't pay your taxes, or if you're jaywalking, or if you're walking a dog without a leash. They can see that happen. If you play a video game too long, they know that happens, they take away points. In our country, we have something called a hate crime. And when hate crimes were first legislated, I really had a problem with that. It immediately made me think of 1984, because a hate crime is a distinct category of crimes that have a broader effect than most other kinds of crimes, because victims are not only the crime's immediate target, but also other people like them. And the FBI defines this as recognizing an offender's bias, which means you have to know that the offender was thinking hateful thoughts. Now, you can walk all through your life and hate, right? That's not a crime, and you don't get arrested for that. If you go break a window, that's a crime, you can get arrested for that. But if you break the window because of hate, then you get, it's a greater offense. So somebody has to read your mind. They have to know what you were thinking while you were doing that. And, you know, that's a tough thing to do, know what people are actually thinking. One of the things that psychologists have learned in the past few years is that most of the actions that we perform, we don't even know we're going to perform them until we do. And then we look at what we just did and we rationalize why we did it. So to say, you know, somebody actually planned out this whole hateful series of events. It's a tough thing to prove. And also you got to think about, does why really matter? I mean, crimes are about stopping behavior. So do you really care why somebody did a behavior and you want to stop it? Does why matter? And to me, like, hate crime is kind of verging on thought crime. And if the FBI arrests you for thinking the wrong things and then doing something as a result of your way of thinking, there's the thought police. Where you could argue that point. Now, many organizations in the West are turning to tracking technology to measure productivity, especially with employees working from home. Back in the day when I worked at Bell Laboratories, we had journals we could take home. They were called the Silent 700. Remember those? Had a telephone coupler on it. That was when all the telephones were standardized. So they would fit an acoustic coupler, and then you had thermal paper. But anyway, I told my boss I wanted to work at home. He says, "No, if you work at home, I can't see you." So, okay, fine. Well, now a lot of people work at home. They still want to see you. Some chaplains are held to a point system based on how many times they check in with patients. Medical workers are being tracked for how often they wash their hands and for how long they wash their hands, right? You sing happy birthday twice. Your emails are being tracked to an extent, and they're also being scanned for phrases. The NSA has almost all telephone traffic and all digital traffic going through the largest computer system in the world, which they own. And they scan for phrases and keywords. Phone calls being tracked, keystrokes are being counted, badge-ins at the office, facial recognition is becoming commonplace. And employers, they justify this because we need this. We have to monitor productivity, ensure compliance, all of that stuff. So they have good reasons to do it. They use the data to make business decisions and improve processes. But global demand for employee monitoring software was up 78% in 2022. That was the largest increase in years, and the demand has consistently gone up after that. Research by Gartner found that in the next 3 years, 70% of large firms will be using tracking software. So, you say you work at home and you've been working your 8 hours and so on. Well, I can look at your keystrokes and I can see what you're typing and how often you type and so on. So, they can track all that stuff. Another report estimated 8 out of 10 of the largest privately held companies are doing it right now. Cell phones can be tracked by number by just about anybody. You can get an app, and if you know somebody's phone number, you can track them. Many smartphone apps have your permission to turn on your microphone, and this is something very few people know. When you download an app on your phone and it says, I'm going to use your camera, I'm going to use your microphone, I'm going to look up everybody you know, yes or no, and you hit accept because you want the app. Well, and you do it because you say, well, they're doing me a favor, right? They're going to make it easy for me to say, Google, tell me how to get to Ann's house. Then it goes into the database, it comes in, it comes up with the address, it sends you the maps, and bang, zoom, you're going to Ann's house. Well, Google is tracking your movements. I get a report all the time from Google that shows me where I've been over the past month. And the first time they did that, I was shocked. It's like, wait a minute. I know where I've been over the past month. Why do you know where I've been over the past month? But I gave him permission to do that. I gave him permission to turn on my microphone. It might be on right now, I don't know. And if it is, they're listening to me. And the NSA is tracking for key phrases and so on. You watch something on TV, especially if it's streaming, and even if it's not, they know what you're watching. Right? And then they recommend, well, you saw that, now you should look at this. Well, I'll bet they can run that against an artificial intelligence and determine whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or a liberal, or, it's all there. Large cities, especially London, is famous for this. They have cameras all over the place. They're used by law enforcement. I remember when EasyPass came out, a lot of people rebelled against it. I'm not going to use EasyPass, because they can time how long it takes me to get from one toll booth to the next. and mail me a speeding ticket. Right? So they promised they wouldn't do that. But do they do that? You don't know. And they could easily turn that on anytime and start mailing you your speeding ticket. Historical negationism. This is changing history, right? The party in 1984 controls everything in Oceania, even history. Now, the face of the party is Big Brother, and he's modeled after Stalin. He's got the mustache and the stern look and so on. And he's described as an invincibly fearless protector, standing like a rock against the hordes of Asia. He's a black-haired, black-mustachioed, full of power and mysterious calm character. Now, in the book, well, in the movies, there have been like 4 movies that I'm aware of 1984. And in the movie, occasionally you actually see a person who's supposed to be Big Brother, but you don't actually know that there is a Big Brother. This may be a fictional character, for all we know. He never says anything in the book or in the movies. You just see his face. So he's kind of an icon. And they built a cult of personality around this icon, Big Brother. But this whole cult of personality is manufactured by the party, because they want this guy to be something like a living, powerful god. It started in the days of Stalin. The picture on the left is a photograph of Stalin, and you see they cleaned it up because they don't want the people to see Stalin as an old guy, with wrinkles and messed up hair, and his mustache isn't neatly trimmed and so on. So they want everybody to think of him as this gloriously handsome, dictatorial strongman. And this goes on and on. Powerful leaders are always, turned into icons as kind of superhuman. They did it with Hitler. And Hitler was really good at projecting a brand. The little mustache. How many people wore that mustache, even in Hitler's day? It was probably extremely rare. And he seized on that and says, well, I'm going to wear this mustache, so I'm identifiable just by my mustache and the way I part my hair. And today you can go on the internet and Google Hitler cats, and pictures of cats will come up that are black here, and so and nobody would wear their mustache like this today. Can you imagine a news commentator going on the air with that mustache? But it was great brand. It really worked. Here's Il Duce, Mussolini. He was, he picked up on this and said, okay, I like this idea. I like the way this works. Then he seized on it, and he's standing with a lion. How strong can you get? And then we got this stuff. And Trump doesn't look anything like that physically. He's fatter than I. So the Ministry of Truth, this is one of the 4 ministries. They control all information. They control the news, they control entertainment, education, and the arts. So it turns out in the U.S. today, 90% of these companies that provide you with all that media are 6 companies, just 6 companies. If you've got enough money, if you're Elon Musk, say, you can buy Twitter. And if you have a political agenda, you can start to control that political agenda by what you allow and don't allow. Or Rupert Murdoch. He's been doing it for years. My younger son used to work out in Mifflin, and they were textbooks. And one of the things he used to complain to me about is everything that went into the textbooks had to satisfy the 2 largest customers they had, California and Texas. So if Texas says the Civil War was not about racism or slavery, if Texas says that, they can't put it in the textbook because Texas won't buy it. Right? So they had to whitewash all of that business. And they also have to satisfy California, which is, kind of a liberal state. So the Venn diagram of what overlaps between California and Texas is pretty slim. And recently we saw that there was some whole controversy about a math book having a math problem in it that was political, and Texas wanted all of that stuff out of there. The Ministry of Truth in the book does historical revisionism, which takes away the past. And if you're robbed of the ability to learn from history, and you have a constant present status, it's really hard to change anything or even to conceive of how things might change. In the revolution, when our founding fathers decided, that they wanted to break away from England, this was a revolution. And in those days, countries were ruled because of the divine right of kings. So the idea of a revolution is really, really a revolutionary idea. But they knew you could do it because in the year 500, the Romans did it and the Greeks did it. So if they could do it, we could do it, right? And enough of this divine right of kings. We can be a democracy, but suppose you didn't know that that had ever happened. That becomes a really tough thing to change the norm, the status quo. Because you don't know if there's anything else. So Winston Smith is a member of the Outer Party who works at the Ministry of Truth. He rewrites historical records. So he sits at his desk, and a note drops onto his desk out of a pneumatic tube, and it says, this guy never met with that guy. And he has to go through all the newspapers that wrote about that meeting and delete the fact that they ever met. And then they burn the note, and they burn all the old newspapers, and they burn a few copies of a new one that says they never met, or it doesn't mention the meeting at all. And for a long time, Winston, he does this, and after a while, it's getting to him. He has no proof that anything he remembers is actually true, because it's all been changing under him. Well, what was the truth? He doesn't know. And then one day, a note drops on his desk that actually includes a clipping from a newspaper, and it says something that he remembers changing. And this is when he starts becoming a thought criminal at that moment. So here's an example of how this happens in the real world. There's a picture of Stalin standing next to somebody whose name I don't remember. I looked it up, but I never heard of the guy. But anyway, fell out of favor, and he became a non-person, and he suddenly disappeared and no longer existed in any documentation. Here's another example, same kind of thing. I saw a picture of Stalin. I was going to include it, but it was just too much. It was a picture of Stalin with 4 of the people, and then there was another picture with Stalin with only 3 other people. And then it was the same picture, and it's Stalin and only 2 other people. And it finally gets down to Stalin. All by himself. So in 1984, the thinking was there was no past. The past was dead. And you couldn't imagine the future because you had nothing to project from them, right? If there's no past and there's no history rolling along, how do you think about what's going to happen next year? All you know is whatever you think you know, it's all going to change anyway. So there was this impossibility of knowing what life was like before the current status quo, before that revolution. And O'Brien, who's on the Inner Party, says to Winston Smith at one point in the book, who controls the past, controls the future, and who controls the present, controls the past. And here's an example of modern times, right? Trump has often said, I had the biggest turnout of any president who's ever been inaugurated. And of course, we got pictures. And yet he still says, I made a speech. I looked out the field, it looked like 1.5 million people. Well, there are only hundreds of thousands of people there. You can practically count them. But if you say it, it must be true because 60% of Republicans believe he won the election and it was stolen. And Trump replies, well, hey, just remember what you're seeing and what you're reading, that's not what's happening. And this goes back to the state controlling the truth. These charts show where people get their news from determines a heck of a lot of stuff. Now, this colored dot is Republicans who most trust far-right news sources. Okay, so that's that dot there. So if you ask them, who's responsible for January 6th attack on the Capitol? Was it white supremacist groups? No. Was it Donald Trump? No. Was it conservative media platforms that spread conspiracy theories? No. Was it Republican leaders? No. Was it liberal left-wing activists? Yeah. But if you look at Republicans who trust broadcast news, they're very divergent from what Fox News is telling. So who do you trust? If you're a Democrat, you trust CNN. If you're a Republican, you trust Fox News. Where do you go for reporting on elections? If you're a Democrat, you tend to go to CNN. If you're a Republican, you tend to go to Fox News. So you're being fed information which may or may not be biased or true, depending on where you go for your news. Currently, 45% of the claims checked from NBC and MSNBC pundits and on-air personalities, and these are not the newsmen, they're the talking heads that the newsmen bring on. 45% of those people have been rated mostly false, or pants on fire, 40%, 45%. Fox News, the number's 58%. So if you want truth in news, CNN only lies to you 1 out of 5 times. So they're better. I tried to find a source of news that you could trust, and you can Google that all day long. You will never find a good answer. All you get is surveys said, which, book bans. About 300 books were challenged for banning in 2020. In 2022, it was over 1,600 titles. So the idea of banning books is going way up. Here's a map that shows school book bans by state, and Texas is the winner. They have 800 books they want to ban. Florida comes in second. And look at the books they want to ban. Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale. Why? You know, what is that about? Well, it's anti-religious, apparently, and that's a good reason to ban it. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, Toni Morrison's Beloved. They want to ban these books, but most of the stuff they want to ban is about either racism or sex, and the buzzword right now is grooming. If you watch school board meetings about banning books, it's always about grooming. You want my kid to go that way, catch the game. Manipulation of language and reality. This is a way of keeping people in control. The party controls everything, even the way people talk. They talk about newspeak and doublethink. Let's dig into that. In order to prevent unorthodoxy, the Ministry of Truth uses newspeak, and newspeak is a way of trimming down the language so you can't be unorthodox. Newspeak reduces thought to simple opposites, such as good and ungood. So you can't think about gray areas. It's either good or it's ungood. In the end, says the author of, one of the authors of the Newspeak Dictionary, he's working on it constantly. He says, in the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible because there will be no words in which to express it. And if you don't have the language to talk about what's making you uneasy, all you know is you're uneasy, and you just can't say why, right? That's the idea. He also goes on to brag that Newspeak is the only language in the world whose vocabulary gets smaller every year. And you would think in the world we live in today, this would be an impossible thing to do, right? Come up with a language that just trims down your ability to think. The worldview of the party imposed itself most successfully on people incapable of understanding. And this is a key factor, right? If you don't understand stuff, then you can't talk about why it's not working. An example of this is Samuel L. Jackson.
tonight.
Yeah. He once called this the dumbassification of America. And it's the idea of, well, we don't teach civics in school anymore, do we? Is anybody here a teacher? Anybody know? I've read that we don't teach civics anymore. Now, if we don't teach civics anymore, and you watch the news and they say, well, Congress did this, and you don't understand civics, you don't know even how Congress works, you can't say, well, they shouldn't be doing that, because you don't know. So you have to just accept it, because the talking heads that come on are the ones that are saying, you know, yeah, they should be doing that, or no, they shouldn't be doing that, and you can't reference whether that's right or not. The idea behind newspeak is, you know, we're turning things down. If I eat a cookie and I say it's good, okay. If it's a cheesecake cookie, I say, wow, that's plus good. And if you give it to me with a scoop of ice cream, I can say it's double plus good. I don't think it goes past that point. There's no triple plus good. And of course, there's the opposite. There's ungood, double plus ungood. And then there's a bunch of other things. Crime thing. That's what your kids are going to have you arrested by the thought police for. You're thinking about sedition. I can see it on your face. That's face crime, which is another thing you can get caught for. If you don't ever have seditious thoughts, and you actually love Big Brother, well, you're good thinkful. That's a good thing. Double think is the ability to think two things that are diametrically opposed at the same time. And humans are really good at this. In fact, it comes up in Alice in Wonderland. She says, there's no use trying. One can't believe impossible things. And the Red Queen says, I dare say you just haven't had much practice. When I was your age, I always did it for an hour a day. Well, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. I would mention base crime. Old speak is what I'm speaking, because I got a lot of words. Old think is the way I think. Reality control is a cool one. Reality control is when you start to think the wrong way and you catch yourself and you shut it down, right? This reality control. Duck speak, this is one of my favorites. This is when a politician is accosted in the hallway of the Capitol and he runs into the elevator. But if he can't make it to the elevator, he just flaps his mouth and says things that don't necessarily make sense. Here's another Trumpism. Well, what happens is the judge, who happens to be, we believe, Mexican, which is great. I think that's fine. We do other things. We have an array of words to talk about the same thing. Like if a corporation is going to fail, and for political reasons we don't want it to fail, we give them money and we save them. And if I gave them the money, I call that a bailout. But if you give them the money, I'm going to call it corporate socialism, which is a bad. Socialism is a bad word, right? So I'll stick that in there. Entitlement, social welfare, redistribution of wealth, socialism, right? It's a spectrum. You can be pro-life, you can be pro-choice. Well, which is good? If you're pro-choice, you're not pro-life. Therefore, you hate children. And I've actually seen that in writing several times. I'm not a Nazi, I'm alt-right. Right? Alt-right is okay, being a Nazi is not okay. I'm not a socialist, I'm radical left. That's a good thing, but I would wear that as a label. I'm a radical left, I guess. When the word wokeism, when that came out, that was supposed to be a good thing, you know? It's like, I'm woke, and you're not. And then it got turned on its head. Now, if somebody accuses you of being woke, it's a bad thing. So people will seize a word and they'll turn it right around and make it a bad thing for you. Black Lives Matter is an example of that, right? You don't hear the right wing talk about Black Lives Matter. They call it BLM, which takes it totally out of context. It takes all the meaning out of it, and now you can use it as a curse. Crooked media. If you look in in the founding documents, they hold the news as a very high thing to have as part of our government. In fact, Jefferson said, I'd rather live in a country that had strong news than a country that had, I forget what the line was. Do you remember the line?
Yeah.
What's the line?
Big, strong government.
Yeah, I forget what it was. But anyway, you know, the news used to be what kept us straight, right? Politicians lie. The news is going to pull out the lie. But now, all you have to do is say the news is the enemy of the people. It's the crooked media, false flag operations, Obamacare. That was a cool one. You know, that's not the name of the bill, because the Republicans came out and started calling it Obamacare, and that was a bad thing. It was Obama doing it, and then he seized it and he said, "I'm proud to say it's Obamacare. You know, I take that as a win." And then they stopped calling it that as a curse. But, you know, he knew how to handle it. Another thing they do is lately they've started naming bills for something that they're actually not. The Patriot Act, for example, if you're arrested by the FBI because you might be a traitor, under the Patriot Act, you lose all of the rights that are guaranteed to you by the Constitution. Is that patriotism? Well, it's the Patriot Act, so it must be. Party members are further subject to self-deceptive habits of mind, such as crime stop, which is preventive stupidity, which halts thinking at the threshold of politically dangerous thought, and doublethink, which allows simultaneously believing two contradictory things. By the exercise of doublethink, reality is not violated. This is the George Costanza rule. Jerry, if you believe it, it's not a lie. And that's something we see happening all the time. It's a lie until I need it not to be a lie, and then I'll resurrect it, and then when I think it should be a lie again, and all of this is necessary in 1984 because that's the only way you can control the population, control the way they think, control the way they speak. An old idea, as Scott Fitzgerald said in 1936, the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. Whatever the party holds to be the truth is the truth. And one of the things they say in the book is the party is not interested in the overt acts. The thought is all we care about. We do not merely destroy our enemies, we change them, we change the way they think. An example of this in modern times, in 2001, you know, some planes ran into the Twin Towers and a lot of people got killed. And Bill Maher, on his show, Politically Incorrect, he challenged the idea that the president and a lot of politicians were saying that the terrorist hijackers were cowards. They called them cowards over and over again. And he went on there and he says, we've been the cowards. We're lobbing cruise missiles from 2,000 miles away. That's cowardly. Staying in the airplane when it hits the building, say what you want about it, not cowardly. And they immediately took them off the air. So doublethink is something we do all the time, right? And this goes to the death penalty is an example. Well, it can kill a commie for Christ, right? What would Jesus do? So murder is bad. So if you murder somebody, I'm going to kill you, right? This is doublethink, right? If you do it, it's bad. But if I do it because you did it, then I'm good, and it's a good thing. And we can hold those kinds of ideas in our head all the time. Corporations and people. How can that possibly make any sense? Right? And yet it's law. The world works according to God's plan. If the kid burns his hand in the fire, it was God's plan. If you walked off a cliff and died, you know, it must have been part of God's plan. God works in mysterious ways, his miracles to perform. And yet, I'm going to pray for my football team to win. And it may not be God's plan for them to win, but I'm going to pray for it. And here's a true story for you. A relative of mine through marriage was in Afghanistan, and during the time of not a war, but you know there was stuff going on, And he was supposed to go out on patrol one day, but his relatives were praying for him and his safety. So on the one day when he was supposed to go out on patrol and they sent somebody else, that guy got killed. And the people that were praying for him bragged to me that they saved his life. And that was a good thing because somebody else got killed. But that's okay, because they saved his life. Now, you know, God's plan, all aside, they took care of it. That's the whole thing in my book. Another one is God is all knowing, God is all powerful, God is all good, and yet children are born with defective hearts. Part of God's plan. Propaganda. This is another tenet of the world of 1984. There's the Ministry of Plenty. They ration and control the food, the goods, the domestic production, and every fiscal year they claim to have raised the standard of living, even when they haven't. All they have to do, though, is to go to the Ministry of Truth and have them rewrite history so that they have predicted a particular growth rate, and of course that we achieved it, of course it passed it, because they just changed history. Here's another Donald Trumpism, and I'm sorry I'm picking on Trump, but you know, when you look up all these things, he keeps popping up. It's amazing. But anyway, he put this chart up at one point. This is a tweet from Trump. The greatest top 5 monthly job gains in history, and this is under his watch. We are number 1. This is a little bit manipulated though, because they only show 1 month from a given year, right? If you go back and you look at the month before, this happened just before that great jobs growth. So, you know, a little bit of manipulation of the truth here. But as Hitler said, and this is another thing, you know, I've heard this over and over again. It's been attributed to all kinds of people, but it was really good. Hitler said, make the lie big, make it simple, keep saying it, and eventually they will believe it. And these are all the things, or not all, I couldn't fit them on the slide. These are a lot of the things that Trump said about, you know, the election. Before the election happened, he said, if I lose, it'll be because it was rigged. And he just kept on saying it. And people believe him, in spite of everything. Been to court how many times? 63 times, is it? And I think he only won 1 case. And it was a minor issue. And, yeah. But, you know, depends on where you go for your news. Another thing that happens in the book, which fascinated me, is they have designated hate. They have 2 minutes of hate a day, and then they have hate week later on. So what happens in the 2 minutes of hate, you know, it's 2 o'clock, it's time to go down and do 2 minutes of hate. So you go down and you have to hate somebody for 2 minutes. So who are we going to hate? Well, they have this character, Emmanuel Goldstein, who may or may not have once been an inner party member. He may or may not have existed. He leads the Brotherhood, which doesn't exist, and he's the author of the book. The name of the book, by the way, is The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. Okay. But anyway, so it's time for the 2 minutes of hate. So all of us go down to the cafeteria and they show a picture of Emmanuel Goldstein and they start talking about how we should all hate him. We're all booing the guy. And as a mob, we get into a mob mentality and we get it all out of our system. All the hate we've got for our lives, we get out on Emmanuel Goldstein for 2 minutes and then we go back to work. We do this, right? Pick somebody you hate. And when they come up on the news, I mean, I do this. I go, that's son of a bitch. I can, and I turn it off, you know. But other people, I mean, have it running on their TVs all day long. I once went into a restaurant. They had Fox News up, and one of these characters who I don't care for was saying this stuff. And I called the waiter over. I said, "Did you turn that off? I don't want to see that." And he says, "Well, everybody else has done this." Thank you very much. Stratification of society. In the book, you've got the inner party, and they wear a uniform. They wear black coveralls, and they can turn off their view screens, and they get the best of everything. They have carpets on their floors. They can eat stuff that you can't even find in the grocery store. The outer party, to which Winston belongs, they wear blue coveralls, so you can tell them apart. You know they work for the government, but they're not the inner party. They can't turn off their view screens. And then there are proles, and the saying is, only the proles and the animals are free. They don't have view screens. They're not under constant surveillance, at least in their homes. So that's the way it works. The Ministry of Love. The Ministry of Love obviously is not about love, right? This is where you go to get tortured. If you're convicted of a thought crime, you go to the Ministry of Love. And it's referred to at one point in the book as the place where there is no darkness. The lights never go off in the Ministry of Love. And what they do is they take you to room 101, and they'll tell you 2 + 2 = 5, repeat it. And you say, no, it's not, right? So then they torture you in some way. And the way they torture you is they find your deepest fear. For Winston, it's rats. So they put a cage over his head with rats in the cage. And they say, "So Winston, 2 + 2 = 5. Okay, yeah, 2 + 2 = 5. Get this rat off my face. And Julia, his girlfriend, says, "If they could make me stop loving you, that would be the real betrayal. That would be it." Then, of course, at one point in the story, Winston is being tortured. He finally says, "Don't do this to me. 2 + 2 = 5. Do this to Julia." He throws her under the bus. It works. Now, where in the world is this kind of stuff actually happening? Is it 1984 in the US? Not quite. We almost got there, didn't we? But Donald Trump still hasn't given up. I personally don't think he wants to be the president again. I think he's running again just so he doesn't go to jail. Yeah. Hopefully, he goes to jail. But in Italy, Giorgia Meloni won. She's a far-right person. Bolsonaro in Brazil advocated. When I first put this presentation together, he wasn't giving up, right? But since then, he changed his mind. And there are lots of places where it is 1984. My big example here is Iran. It's a theocracy. The guy in charge of the theocracy is Ali Khamenei. He's the supreme leader. He's also called the supreme leader of the Islamic Revolution, and he's also called the supreme leadership authority. So he's got a lot of titles, but they all include the phrase supreme leader. And he's the guy in charge. He's in charge of the armed forces. He's in charge of the judiciary, state television. He's higher than the president. He's in charge of the Guardian Council and the Expediency Discernment Council. Whatever that is. He delineates the general policies of the Islamic Republic. Now, it's a theocracy, which means he's in charge of the religion as well. So what you believe about reality is in this guy's hands. He's in charge of, he makes all the decisions on the economy, the environment, foreign policy, education, and national planning. Khomeini also makes the final decisions on the amount of transparency in elections. And he's dismissed and reinstated presidential cabinet appointees at whim. The people that work for him include the Minister of Defense, the Minister of the Interior, the Intelligence Minister, the Science Minister, the Minister of Education, the Minister of Culture. It all goes back to Khomeini. Iran's regional policy is directly controlled by the office of the supreme leader, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs just doing protocol and ceremonial stuff. He's in charge. All of Iran's ambassadors to Arab countries are chosen by the Quds Force, which reports directly to the supreme leader. The office was established by the Constitution pursuant to the concept of the guardianship of the Islamic jurist. And as the guardian jurist, the supreme leader guides the country, protecting it from heresy and imperialism and ensuring the laws of Islam are followed. In theory, he's elected by an assembly of experts, but the candidates for membership of the assembly of experts, including the president and the parliament, have their candidacy approved by the guardian council, whose members are half appointed by the supreme leader and half subject to the parliament, who are all selected by the supreme leader. So he's it. He's Big Brother. We can skip that. The supreme leader is legally considered inviolable. So he's like the Pope. In that anything he says must be true. It's true. And if you don't think it's true, you're a thought criminal. So what's it like to live under a theocracy like that? Well, they have this National Hijab and Chastity Day, July 12th, and it's to promote veiling. So in September, 22-year-old Masa Amini was arrested by the morality police. And if that isn't the thought police, what is? Because her hijab was not up to spec. Some hair was showing. Bad. So they arrested her. She was taken to a re-education center, and on her way there, somehow she went unconscious and got beaten pretty brutally. She went into a coma, and 3 days later, she was dead. And because some hair showed. So the women in Iran got very brave about this, and they started to rise up against the regime. And it's been over 4 months now since that happened. And the women are refusing to wear their hijabs now. There were protests worldwide, but they kind of tapered off. But more than 326 demonstrators in Iran have been killed. And Art told me yesterday that they were using some kind of bullets that blinded people. And when they went to the hospital, they would get arrested because the way you got blinded was by being in a protest. So you're a thought criminal. And they got them. But they've disbanded the religious police. Right? They changed their name to something else. They fired these guys. They're still there. And there's, it may play after all. That can't happen here, right?
The reason we had so many overreaching regulations in our nation is because the church complied. The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk. It's not the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
Okay, I don't know if you could hear that, but that was Laura Boebert, a congresswoman who was reelected, although with a very slim margin. But she believes the church should be telling the government what to do. And all that stuff they say about the separation of church and state, that's all BS. And she really believes this and got reelected. So could it happen here? So if you want to know, is 1984 actually happening anywhere? All I have to do is ask a few questions. Is there a big brother? And there are a lot of countries where there is a big brother. Is there a perpetual war state going on? And, you know, in a lot of Arab countries, they have a big brother. They have a war going on with, say, Israel. That's been going on for how many thousands of years? Are the people under constant surveillance? Well, we know that's happening in places. Are the people being suppressed and controlled? Is there a significant stratification of society? And, you know, it's happening all over the world. So why? Well, the party seeks power entirely for its own sake. This is O'Brien speaking in the book. We are not interested in the good of others. We are interested solely in power, not wealth or luxury. Of course, they actually get the wealth of luxury. Only power. It's all about power. We know that no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it. Power is not a means, it's an end. Now, in the book, I think it's O'Brien again, he says, if you want a vision of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. That's a nasty way to think. But when they talked to Orwell about this afterwards, he said, well, the moral to be drawn from this nightmare situation is simple. Don't let it happen, right? The women in Iran are trying to not let it happen. And it depends on them. And if you ask me any questions about this, I can't answer them. So if you ask a question, somebody else in the audience can say, oh, I know that.
I just remember.
Oh, he's got the mic.
Give him the microphone.
The author Jack London wrote many books, really about the Yukon and what have you. But he also wrote some books that are political.
Yeah.
One book was The Iron Heel. And I read that that was written in 1908, so like 40 years before George Orwell. And it's a similar thing. It's democracy that runs the government. So, any thoughts on that book? Not
I never read that.
I find it a very interesting book.
I never read that one. One of the things that happens a lot, you said plutocracy. And again, this is all about ignorance. A lot of people conflate economic systems with political systems, and sometimes they're very tightly woven together. Sometimes they're not. You can be a socialist in a democracy. That's not necessarily, diametrically opposed. You can't be a capitalist in a communist society. You can live in an oligarchy where you can pretend to be a democracy and yet not be a democracy. Oligarchy, that's another one.
I did a little reading on the critique of that. They said that George Orwell was a bit influenced by that.
Yeah.
I suggest the book to read.
I was just going to mention, that we may dislike intensely the Shah of Iran, but he did give the women power, and they managed to then get rid of it. So, and the women in Iran are super powerful. They're a bunch of wimps compared to that.
Yeah, I think they're powerful because you can't kill them all. That would be the end of the run.
Ron, thank you. That was terrific.
Oh, thank you.
I have a question, but I'd like to explain first why I'm asking the question. So I just read this morning that a PhD candidate in Florida did some experiments with mice, and she fed the mice aspartame, which is the artificial sweetener. What she discovered is the mice began acting very anxious. And it actually, with the male mice, there were actually 2 generations in which that anxiety continued. And then she also discovered if you give the mice an anxiety-reducing medication, that they stop their anxious behavior. So that leads to my question is, in 1984, did the government also change chemicals in the foods?
No, not in the book. But
Not in the book, okay.
That's because, it's not in the book because they had no idea back then that there was an epigenome. They had no idea about a microbiome. In fact, we only learned about the microbiome like 11 years ago. Come back in February, we're going to talk about that.
Christians can believe anything they want, but the fact of the matter is, in this country, we are a constitutional government run by people, by humans, and not Christians. So
Wait, Christians are humans.
Under the Constitution, the 10th Amendment embodies the police power. This is what gives, these extremists the power to surveil and police us. And sometimes it gets too far out of hand, which I think is, I see it happening all the time. Okay, so what are your thoughts on that?
Be careful who you vote for. I mean, that's the only power we got, is who we vote for. And if you, I mean, what's his name, Walker? People voted for that guy. He almost won. He almost won.
They voted for the party.
They voted for the party, and then you know, when you view politics as a team sport, that's when you get into serious trouble, right? He's the guy in the red shirt. Voting for him, bad news, because he's just going to be a puppet of the party, and you're playing right along. Herschel Walker.
I have a comment on revising history.
Yeah.
I think today it's more difficult because once something's on the internet, it's there somewhere forever. But instead of changing history, you just confuse it. There's so much of it out there.
Yeah.
You can't differentiate that from fiction. I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, it's a good thing and a bad thing, right? The internet was like television. It could be really good for everybody, or you could look up pictures of kittens, or you know, it's what you do with it. And who you listen to. Who are your heroes? Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It was very nice. Thanks to Eunice for having me in person. I really do appreciate that. But I've read 1984 a couple of times. I've seen a couple of different movies. I think it's a fascinating story that this was written in 1940 or 1941.
1948.
48 is you know, it's so amazing that he was able to kind of predict things going on. But the one thing that I took from is like the very end of the book. I believe that after Winston gets like tortured, and then they actually, I believe the last time the book's actually getting killed, right?
No, he loves Big Brother. Yeah,
That's
I love Big
what I
Brother.
was going to get. He loves Big Brother. I thought there was something about him getting shot, but that he loves Big Brother, and the fact that when he's getting tortured, like, you know, that it's not only one thing to believe the two separate thoughts in your head, but you know, believe a lie, but also that you actually kind of enjoy it, you know, and that you give it up for the party, you know, that you actually believe the lie and you sort of enjoy that, or you know, make it part of your belief.
Yeah,
belief
well,
yourself.
some of the guys that attacked the Capitol on January 6th, they were there, you know, if it meant they had to die, they were willing to die. They were totally bought it. They love Big Brother.
Try and get back.
Does anyone have Alexa at home?
I got,
Yep.
I've got them all over the house.
Okay, so I like to
We
see
know.
on the radio, and his computer biz was visiting, and he pointed out that Alexa hears it all. That's weird.
Well, they say she doesn't.
Yeah.
I was working, thank you for your talk, it was wonderful. I remember working as a history teacher, and I was in a meeting where they were trying to sell us books for the next year. And it was more like a magazine than a history book. It was pictures, high interest, low level stuff.
Yeah.
And they omitted so much that I had to ask, where's the 1921 Tulsa race riot? And the answer was, well, we can't fit everything in the book. You know, I asked them about lynching. How come there was so little coverage about that? Again, can't fit everything in the book. I was surprised and dismayed. And I asked a number of history teachers that I worked with if they knew about the Tulsa race riots of 1921. Only one knew a little bit about it. So this is how we erase history.
Yeah.
The people who are teaching it don't even know it, you know? So just to back up what you're saying.
As I was listening to your talk, which was wonderful, by the way, I started thinking of Ron DeSantis, and at least recently there was a judge who basically struck down this whole don't say gay and all that kind of stuff. And he referenced like Florida's going to be like a dystopian society,
Like in 1980.
like in 1984. I don't know if he used 1984, but He did, yeah, and it's really, it's like exactly that, and everybody thinks this guy is great, all these Republicans have had it with Trump are lining up behind him, so.
I saw an interesting video featuring Ron DeSantis recently, and it was a side-by-side of Trump and DeSantis, and they're both doing this.
Yeah.
And every motion Trump was making, DeSantis was making, was mirroring the guy, trying to seize his base through hypnosis.
Has everyone seen the mock-up of Trump where he's playing an accordion?
Going back to what the gentleman said about history books and knowing history. My daughter, my granddaughter she's in the fifth grade, she got a lesson about great industrialists. Henry Ford was, the teacher just went on and what a positive thing he was, and what a great man he was.
Great anti-Semite.
And it was interesting. So when my daughter got this sheet with all praises, the assembly line, and $5 a day pay that he raised, double the pay, and everything. And this was during Rosh Hashanah, the week of, and Ford in 1919 started to produce a newspaper, which was totally anti-Semitic. I mean, that was the Protocols of Zion. So my daughter was very upset, and she sent back a letter to the teacher, and the teacher got frightened to death because, teachers can get fired for lots of things. And she called my daughter and she said, I had no idea about Henry Ford. And it's like it's been lost to history. And the principal called her also to apologize and said, I never heard that Henry Ford had the Dearborn Independent, which was the second most disseminated newspaper in the 1920s. So we remember what we want to remember.
And disregard.
And I'm totally sure that the teacher meant no harm, was talking out of incomplete knowledge and a level of ignorance that she shouldn't have. And I'm sure in the future will not be sending, that kind of total 100% positive look at Henry Ford.
So how many people heard about Henry Ford in school when they were growing up?
Well, heard about
And how many heard that he was a real and anti-Semite? I didn't.
Nobody heard that.
Whereas not only did he have the Dearborn Independent, but he disseminated anti-Semitic literature in every dealership. It was a requirement.
You got a medal from Hitler.
Yeah.
You did, and Hitler mentions him in Mein Kampf as somebody to be emulated, as well as American eugenics, which the Nazis used.
Yeah, I only learned about it,
Yeah.
maybe 20 years ago.
Yeah.
That just made me think of, and I can't remember her name, but who's the guy that we have in our history books that went through Florida and was looking for the fountain of youth, but he was. Well, the real story is he went from Indian village to Indian, making friends and dinner, and then he would slaughter everybody and move on to the next village and make friends and then slaughter everybody, men, women, and children. But in the textbooks, it's just like, oh, he explored Florida and he was so good and he was looking for the fountain of youth, but he was a murderer.
When I went to Catholic school, that's where I got my education. They were bringing Christianity to the New World. All these guys they weren't here to get gold. They were here.
Try teaching the truth about Columbus in public school. Teachers are terrified. But we need our children to understand why people are toppling over statues of Columbus and applying for name changes to schools. So this is how damaging our teaching of history is.
Just wanted to mention, pick up on that anti-Semitism stuff is for. who hasn't read it yet, I would strongly recommend everyone to look at the Atlantic of December, where they talk about the Germans dealing with the Stolpersteine, which means those bricks that they put in where people stumble over, so they will remember what happened to the Jewish people. And together with that, there's a book written by a Southern lady, I think Susan, I forget her last name, who lives now in Berlin and would never, and she's Jewish, and she would never live in the deep south of America, because the Germans at least deal with our history every bloody night, and I'm talking about prime time, what the Spanish have still to talk about their issues. And I just read the article, it's the head article, the lead article in the Atlantic of the December issue. It's really comprehensive and tells us how we refuse to deal with our past in this country. You know, we're going through that right now.
Right, it's anti-white. You tell too much truth.
Thank you for the talk. I agree with your interpretation completely, but I felt when I read it, I felt one other thing is that part of Big Brother was your coworker, your neighbor, you know, even your lover. You never really knew who could rat on you.
Yeah.
You never really knew. And this maybe my personal paranoia, but when I'm out in the public, all right, and I hear certain remarks or I see certain actions, I'm always reluctant to say something because I don't know if they're a MAGA, you know, or MAGA, excuse me, individual who's just going to go nuts on me.
Yeah.
So I'm cowed by that. It may just be me, but that's how I feel.
Imagine living in a state where people are walking around with guns. I mean, you go to vote and there's a guy standing there with a mask on his face that you can't even see who he is. And he's carrying an AK-47 and he's just monitoring the polls.
Civic duty.
Civic duty.
The name that interested me most on the list was Viktor Orban of Hungary. And I think we have less to worry about Hitler or China or Russia, but Viktor Orban's government is, in quotes, still a democracy. And they have whittled away the freedom of the press. They have whittled away democracy itself slowly but surely, so that you really can't run against the government. And when you see what the Supreme Court is doing, and what they may do in the next weeks ahead, is to whittle away our freedoms, like the Dobbs decision about abortion, which is a religious decision. It's a religious decision based on fundamental Christianity. And it's interesting, there's a suit being put up by a Jewish organization that Judaism, parts of Judaism, do not believe that life begins at conception.
In the Bible.
It's the quickening, and the Dobbs decision was wrongly decided even against American history.
Yeah.
So how does the Supreme Court deal with another claim about when life begins?
However they want.
Ignore it.
In the Bible, life begins with the first breath. Every reference to the beginning of life is the first breath.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, we've reached sort of the noon hour, and I don't see hands, so I'm going to wrap it up and thank Ron for the talk. All right, so we'll see you again in January.